Good morning. Thanks for joining Family Caregiver Alliance for Younger Adult Family Caregivers, a discussion with Aisha Atkins and Jen Chan. I'm Calvin, the Education Coordinator at Family Caregiver Alliance and your host for today. So over 4 decades, Family Caregiver Alliance has been working across the Bay Area and also the nation to improve the well-being of family caregivers. We offer support through consultations, classes, workshops, retreats, publications, and advocacy. So to learn more about Family Caregiver Alliance or access our online resource center, please visit caregiver.org. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. I'll also be asking if you might be able to provide a little bit of feedback, so I'd like to thank you all in advance for filling that out. So today I'd like to welcome our guests, Aisha Atkins and Jen Chan. Aisha is the constituency organizer for Caring Across Generations, the co-executive director of Love Labor Project, and also a full-time caregiver to her parents. She's a storyteller and advocate who is passionate about building an equitable, inclusive, and comprehensive public health and care infrastructure by using media, storytelling, culture, and public policy. Aisha has also been published in works both academic journals and popular publications. Our next presenter is Jen Chan. She's the founder of Senior Shower Project. It's a startup with a mission to celebrate family caregivers of older adults with the party. She sells caregiver greeting cards, creates senior shower party kits, curates caregiver gift boxes, and also hosts virtual caregiver dance parties. Inspired by caregiving for her grandmother, Jen dedicates her career to elevate the family caregiver role with fun, love, and positivity. Jen also facilitates support groups for LGBTQ seniors, dementia caregivers, and of course, young caregivers. So now that you know more about today's presenters, I'd like to turn things over to Aisha and Jen.
Thank you, Calvin.
Yeah, thank you, Calvin, for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Welcome everyone that's tuning in on our discussion today, whether it's good morning or good afternoon. Happy to be here to chat with Aisha on our caregiving journeys. And caregiving is truly unique to each individual. And I'm here today as a former caregiver. You know, I started as a young caregiver in my experience. I started in, say, my mid-20s, and I took care of my grandma for about 10 years, so from 25 to 35. And then just for me, I think caregiving was such a big part of my adulthood. And I emphasize that because as young caregivers, I would say young adult caregivers, Aisha, maybe like 40 and under, maybe it's flexible, right? That age timeline. That I oftentimes, when I was caregiving for my grandma, I said, I've been caregiving for most of my adult life, you know, starting in 25. So to me, the topic of young adult caregiving really hits home to me. And I mentioned I'm a former caregiver now. Grandma passed away in May 2015, but I can tell you that it just feels like it was still yesterday while I was doing all the caregiving duties and all that. And I'm here today to let you know that I haven't stopped caregiving. For me, you know, when you're in caregiving, that you think, okay, when is this going to be over? But I'm here as a former caregiver saying, you know what? I got so involved in it. I can't see anything else except for doing even more caregiving, whether it's for other caregiver communities, facilitating support groups, or just really advocating for caregiving policies that really affect the welfare of families that are out there. So I would say that very happy to be here, very honored to be here, because I find caregiving abilities and it's caregiving, but as I'll talk about through today's discussion, that when you start embracing caregiving as a lifestyle, not just something you check in and check out, then the world can be yours if you want to take on caregiving on many levels. And so I'll start. I'll pause on that. What about you, Aisha? What are your thoughts on caregiving?
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, when you mentioned that you had been caregiving for the better part of your adult life. That certainly resonates with me. I began my caregiving journey at 27. I started caring for my mother when she was diagnosed with dementia. I am now 37. So I too have been in this journey for a decade thus far. My mother is still with us, and I am continuing my caregiving duties now. I also provide care for my father, who has suffered multiple strokes. So I'm certainly in this for the long haul, but I also identified with your continuation of your caregiving journey, Jen, and how you pivoted your attention and creating space and community. So you're providing care in a different way than I think caregiving is generally perceived. But I think for some people, caregiving definitely becomes a part of their identity. Interestingly enough, a lot of folks don't identify as caregivers, right? Is that something that you would say was true for you when you started taking care of your grandmother? Did you know the term caregiver, and is it something that you identified with?
Uh, Honestly, I did not know the word caregiver. I just thought of myself as the granddaughter taking care of my grandma. I always want to just give a quick shout out to my entire family. We had a big family, lots of cousins, brothers, aunties, uncles. So I was not the only one. I shared primary caregiving duties with my brother. But I like to talk about that because we had all hands on deck. But being the primary caregivers at that time, we were just doing what we thought we needed to do without knowing the terminology of a caregiver. So I would have to say I wouldn't have self-identified as a caregiver until maybe 4 to 5 years into it. And it's very blurry on when the exact point was. But at that point, it was more realizing that I'm responsible for an older adult. I'm responsible for my grandma. And when you start doing more of the hands-on caregiving, having to go to the hospitals, explain your relationship to your grandma, or picking up the medications, making the doctor's appointments, doing the phone calls, saying, yes, I'm the caregiver for my grandma, then all those conversations and all start really getting into your head that you're not just, oh, I'm just helping grandma out. No, this is an actual role. So for me, there's one part too. I think there's two parts to that question. Like, when did you self-identify? I identify when I realized this really was a responsibility, that I really want to take care of grandma. And then, but the other part was that there was, I think there's an internal conflict, if that's the word, like resistance. Like I find as young adult caregivers, again, it's I would say maybe our prime time, in our 20s, we want to explore our careers, we want to explore dating. And then the time that we could use to go date, explore, travel, pursue our careers, or even higher education, that time is dedicated at home taking care of another adult. So doing the caregiving part of it was kind of taken away from just the adulthood identity. So kind of splitting to, hey, who do I want to become as an adult? What type of professional do I want to be? What type of family do I want to create for myself? That kind of pauses, and then you kind of go into caregiving. But if you weren't ready to jump or dive into caregiving, it's a hard role to accept, because speaking personally, there's still a part of me that's wanting to pursue all these things. So when I say internal conflict, resistance, it's, do I want to be a caregiver? Wait, how long is this job going to be? Nope. I mean, nobody told me when I was 25, 26, it was going to be a 10-year job. Think about that right now. Who wants to sign up for a 10-year job?
Most definitely.
Yeah. And with the unknown ending. And unfortunately, when I say unknown ending, that ending is it's the worst case scenario for your family. So it's hard to kind of grasp that. So that identity piece was just, okay, I want to be a caregiver, but I don't know if I want to do this, but now I have to juggle. So I think maybe it took me 4 to 5 years to figure out to embrace the caregiving role, because I was trying to find the balance. Like, how do I embrace this? How do I do this day in and day out and still be very enthusiastic, compassionate, very driven about it, but also balance all my dreams and aspirations and figure out, what's the path to that. So that's kind of I think 4 to 5 years for that. What about you? When did you embrace the caregiver identity? When did you self-identify?
I think it's a bit fuzzy for me too. There's not an exact date, but I would say probably maybe about 4 years into the role, into these responsibilities. And it's interesting because I don't know that it's a term that I either heard before or paid any attention to before. It's really interesting, and I so greatly appreciate our family practitioner who, during a visit for my mother, just took a moment and asked my father and myself how we were doing. And we both were just, we're hanging in there, And he further explained the reason that he asked how we were doing is because oftentimes the caregivers can experience burnout. And I was like, caregiver, okay. I'm definitely, okay, I identify with the burnout piece, but this caregiver thing, that's new. And immediately, as many millennials do, I got home, I consulted Dr. Google, and I looked up this medical terminology that I was previously unfamiliar with, and it opened an entirely new world. Suddenly, I could seek support in a way that I hadn't before because I knew what it was that I needed support with. I needed support with caregiving. And that support looked like, for me, initially, Facebook groups and Twitter feeds and being a part of conversations about what it meant to be a caregiver. What I found, however, early on in that journey was that many of those places of support were not designed with me in mind, with the other identities that I hold as a young Black woman, right? So many of these support groups are, predominantly older adults, which makes sense. Folks caring for a spouse or a parent who's considerably older than they are. Many of the groups, certainly in my local community, the population is predominantly white, upper class individuals, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But when you hold identities that are minority within your community, it can make the ability to relate to the others in the group difficult. And so I realized, I recognized that I probably wasn't experiencing these things alone, even though I did feel isolated. I did not know any of my peers who were experiencing the same thing. They were living that more typical millennial life that we see advertised at every turn, with whether it was pursuing an advanced degree or dating and getting married or finding their long-term partner and starting families, if that's something that they wanted to do, making gains in their careers. So, buying a home and all of these kind of milestones and benchmarks that we, particularly in American society, value as signs of successful adulting, successful adulthood. And those were things that I was not able to participate in at this particular time in my life. So I too had mixed feelings about the term caregiver, because if identifying as a caregiver meant that I had to sacrifice these other things or somehow further ostracize myself from my peers and separate myself from my peers because I couldn't pick up on the weekend and go for a girls' trip, or I could, I wasn't, I couldn't afford the, $40 dinners in the city. Like those weren't, because I wasn't fully employed. And that's another, area that is often affected for young adult caregivers is the beginnings of their careers. And we live in a society that your long-term well-being is defined by your ability to adhere to this capitalist timeline of, you get the job, then you get the promotion, and you continue climbing this ladder to sustain and to support yourself. When you're not able to do those things, it can be really difficult. So finding other folks who identify with that, and then also identify with the additional challenges of systemic racism and sexism, and kind of finding those intersections of support was really difficult, and it made being a young adult caregiver all the more isolating for me. I don't know, did you ever feel isolated, or did you ever have difficulty finding other caregivers early on? Like once you identified or self-identified as a caregiver, did you find difficulty finding others who could relate, or was it helpful for you having siblings and cousins and other family members who were in that zone with you?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, what you just shared, there's a couple of things that I just, it completely resonated with me going back in time. And just thank you for talking about the intersectionalities of not just being a caregiver, but also race and ethnicity, and potentially even gender identity, just all of those wrapped into one, and trying to find your cohort, your peers who are going through caregiving. When I think caregiving, and you spoke about it too as young adults, maybe the perceived trajectory for adults is to advance in their career, start a family, buy a home, yada, yada, yada. No, caregiving, hey, guess what? It's a wild trajectory. It's just, it pivots. You just kind of got to stay flexible. I definitely saw that type of trajectory. And then for me, there were times when I felt like it was slipping away from me. I saw my peers moving ahead into whatever they were doing. But I chose to quit my day job and then to stay home with grandma. My grandma had diabetes. She was incontinent. She was in a wheelchair. So had lots of diaper duties, had to transfer her, medication management. And I just knew that I just had to be there as companionship to just make sure she doesn't fall. She was on a walker and a wheelchair, but that I couldn't have that on my mind. And I chose to quit my job. I said, I'm young. And here's the flip side. I said, I'm young enough. I'll figure it out. I'll get a job later. I'll work it out. But you don't anticipate, I would have to say, the feelings of, okay, I'm here now. And my grandma, she got mad at me for quitting my job. She said, hey, you're wasting your college education. Why did we do this? I don't need you. So please go away. So you're saying, hey, I want to be here. The person you're trying to care for is saying, no, don't do this. And there's also a transition period. Caregiving is a very, very windy trajectory with a lot of transition periods. So for me, it was an interesting time, and in finding peer support, I didn't find anybody that was doing what I was doing. And I had very supportive peers. I had an apartment in San Francisco where I shared a house with 4 other roommates, and they knew my days. Like Wednesdays, at least Wednesdays and Sundays are for sure grandma days. And I even told them, don't invite me to anything. Just don't even invite me to anything on Wednesday and Sundays, because I would, experience FOMO. Don't even. And I also did want to go back to just in terms of my family, were they able to connect? Most of my family members aren't very, I guess have to say, maybe it's a cultural thing, but didn't really express their feelings a lot. It's really get the job done, do what's right. And I respect that. I respect my Chinese culture, but I was not able to really share my feelings a lot with my family members. Just do the job, make sure everybody's safe, and it's all good. And so in that aspect, I had to reach out. At that time, I wasn't really on social media too much to join the Facebook groups. So I really went into kind of self-preservation mode. Like, what did I like? What did I like to do? I like to go hiking. That's good. Find friends that like hiking. I like to go dance. If there was time to go to music dance festivals, I went there to do that. I felt like it wasn't necessarily a support, for talking about caregiving. I just needed a release. And then I don't want to miss out on talking about how I also felt I didn't feel like I could connect. I did go to support groups, but they weren't. It was just a completely demographic, older adults. They were older adult children taking care of their aging parents. And there's a couple of times I went in there and I got a weird look and they asked me if I was in the right place. And I said, yes, I'm here. I take care of somebody. I need to talk to somebody. I need to share my feelings. And that type of, I mean, it was welcoming after they realized I was in the right place, but to be asked, are you sure you're in the right group? It kind of made me feel a little odd. And also I've gone to many moons ago, I went to aging conferences, and sometimes I don't know, maybe it was just, I don't know, the leadership, I don't know, but I also felt out of place. They would say, are you at the right conference? And I said, yes, I am. But at these aging conferences, you immediately, if I saw you, Aisha, at one of the conferences, I would have said, do you want to be my friend? Let's meet after this workshop, please. So in essence, it's kind of like being a young adult caregiver, you can kind of spot where we are and that we can build the community. But as we start the journey, I think in the very beginning, it takes a little bit of time. It just doesn't kind of gravitate to you. You kind of have to figure out, okay, how do I reach out? What works for me? Does this dynamic work for me or not? So that's how I felt in terms of having support. And I'm just going to take a moment here. I want to take a little bit at the chat. I see some people relating to what we've been saying. This last comment, I felt like a mascot from our caregiver support groups, but no one else my age or in my family could relate. Yes, that mascot feeling.
Most definitely. Most definitely. You know, and it's interesting. When you describe your experiences in the support groups and at the aging conferences, something that came to my mind as to why people react the way that they do, I think that people forget that from the day that we are born, we are aging.
Yeah.
And that process looks different for everyone. And I think something that I've learned over the course of my journey has really been to pay attention to the aging process, not only for my parents, but for myself. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I'm 37 now. That's still very young in the grand scheme of things, particularly as our mortality rates extend, our life expectancy rather extends. But I still am beginning to give consideration to what I want the end of my life to look like, right? And I think it's something that historically people have opted out of talking about. There are a lot of reasons, and I think particularly in communities of color, mm-hmm. aging, death, and dying, these are topics that can be very taboo. Mm-hmm. There's maybe kind of more of a spiritual tone that can be taken to some of these discussions. I know in many African American households, there may be discussion about after one passes away and afterlife and those sorts of things, but very, very little discussion on what life looks like as your mobility changes, as your cognition may change, who will be in place to provide care for you, who can make those decisions about your health care, about your finances. And the experience that I'm going through with my parents has made me far more cognizant about what that process will look like for me, particularly because, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jen, but some of the statistics that we continuously hear about millennials is that millennials are getting married, for instance, at far fewer rates than previous generations. We are delaying, for those who are interested in having children,
Mhm.
or even adopting, that process is being delayed.
Mhm.
And so the communities and the structures that people have relied on
Mhm.
historically to provide care and support are also kind of going away, is something that I observe. If you do not, if you are not in a committed relationship of some kind, if you do not have children, and certainly not to insinuate that a reason for having children is so they can take care of you. But I also imagine that once upon a time, that was the logic, right? And, it had a lot to do with making sure that someone could carry on your legacy, but also, take your place in certain roles that you played in your life. And so with those changes, and compounded with the fact that as a caregiver, regardless of what I thought my life would be like in terms of dating and relationships, in terms of family planning, it's very different than I think I could have anticipated. And I don't know that I ever really had the opportunity to thoughtfully consider those things. And now that I am considering those things, I'm not in a position to prepare for that part of my life, if that's something that I choose to pursue. Conversely, if I was actually thinking about this last night, if I just decided, you know what, I think life could be really good as a single childless person.
Okay.
In addition, obviously, to the stigma that can be associated with those things, I realized, what happens if I experience cognitive decline or develop, receive a dementia diagnosis? First of all, how would I even get that diagnosis? Oftentimes, people with dementia get a diagnosis because someone else in their life who sees them and spends time with them on a regular basis notices some declines, notices memory loss. It bears witness to them getting physically lost, and, or behavioral changes. If there's no one else in your life to observe you, then there's no way for you to get help, really. So I, started thinking about all of these things, and then panic sets in because I start to think, oh my gosh, I need to get I need to get married, or I need to like find my person, because I'm afraid of aging alone
Yes.
without the support. Because there are instances of people with dementia being arrested or other, or being harmed in some way. And we know that the prison population, instances of police brutality are, overwhelmingly, 50% of them are with folks who have some sort of mental illness or cognitive decline. So and then as a Black woman, you add statistically to that, and that's definitely a fear that I have. So yeah, like what's the solve? What's the solution if you're not in a position to get out there and date traditionally, or and also just presenting, bringing yourself as a caregiver to the table and saying, I can't go on any like a spontaneous road trips, but I'm a really nice person. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings on that?
Oh, that's a lot to digest. I'm just saying, I'm just bringing in, I mean, I'm even taking notes. I'm like, okay,
I love it.
these are huge talking points, because you brought into just talking about the concept of death, aging, right? And then also talking about being alone. If you choose, we all have a choice. As caregivers, we have a choice. Sometimes we don't feel like it, but there is a choice. Like we choose every day. We choose every day to be a caregiver. We choose to do, we choose between things. So if we choose to be a single childless person, what type of safety net can we create without having the traditional family model? So I can talk about those two things first. Concept of death, it's hard for people if they haven't dealt with death. It's a very scary topic. There could be a lot of fear, but the concept is normalizing the conversations. End of life happens for everyone. There's a beginning, and then there's always an end. We just don't know how long that journey is, and as caregivers, we want to make that a very quality filled journey. But at some point, there's going to be that conversation. speaking personally from my culture, Chinese culture, sometimes when you talk about death, it's kind of like an omen. You don't want to put that on to your family members, so you don't want to deal with that. And it was a little difficult towards the end. My grandma had she had was diagnosed. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but she was. The doctor said, she had a bad. She went through pneumonia, and then we found out that she had a bed sore that turned into a stage 4 cancer wound. And then the doctor said, it's really deep in. She's got 6 months to live. Hospice care at home, and then everything was really real. And then I was the one who was signing all the legal documents. My aunties, her adult children, did not sign the paperwork because they just, readiness level to accept that part of end of life. But I said, I got to do it. Let's talk about it. Let's have a family meeting. 6 months or less to live is a real conversation, but not everybody's ready for the conversation, because if you start talking about it, putting that energy out there, then that could be something that you're creating. And for some folks, they don't want to do that. So having these conversations, it's a very delicate topic. I don't think there's, just specifically for my family and culture, but it could be a topic just in terms of having the conversation of what do you want, what type of quality things do you want as you age later in life? These are conversations you can sprinkle into just a timeline of conversations with everyone. Or even just to your point, if you choose to be a single childless person, you can start telling your entire community, hey, when I get older, this is what my quality of life is. This is what I define as my quality of life. This is what I want surrounding me. And I can tell you, I've done that. And I've told many of my friends, just, if you had to decide on my end of life situation, just make sure I can still eat ice cream. That's quality of life for me. If you need one thing and nobody needs to argue about it. I want to eat ice cream by myself. So if you have to make decisions on the feeding tube or other things, there you go. If I can't eat ice cream by myself, that's not quality. That's kind of like having, like lightening the conversation a little bit, not just what's going to happen, and also framing if you want to talk about what you want your funeral to look like. I often said, you know what, I like to dance. So at that celebration of life event, I want like a music festival, have the music, have people dancing. That's the energy I enjoy. Please have that at my celebration of life. So having these conversations are really good. And in terms of family planning, I battled that a lot. Let's just talk about it. It's hard to split time to date. Sometimes you're always on call. I was on dates and I was always checking on my phone in case something happened. I always said, hey, just so you know, I'm on call. So if this goes, I have to run. It's not you, it's me. But what I really, when I started embracing caregiving, get this, Aisha, I said, you know what? This might be really good for me. I may be delaying my process, but I'm really kind of filtering my entire dating process of quality people that understand caregiving. So when I started dating, first date, sit down, eat. Hey, Jen, what's your story? I'm just going to get cut to the chase. If you're dating me, it's a twofer. You're dating me and my grandma. You can immediately tell if the person's interested in learning more, or they say, okay, well, I don't know what's happening here. So immediately just say you go from trying to date somebody for 2 years and figure out if they're the right fit for you. You'll find out on the first date. So I felt like I was catching up on time. Let's not waste time. Let's just see if, hey, you want to learn caregiving. Or if they ask other dating questions, I go straight into it. Would you change my diaper if I needed you to? I mean, it's a weird dating question, but it's so true, because then you know if this person has that compassionate heart. Because if you've been doing it for 10 years, I've been doing it for 10 years, I want to make sure somebody can do it for me for at least a couple of years. So I say no filter, get straight into it. And if they can respect that, and if they want to learn more about it, then that would be a person that you would want to keep in your safety net. Not necessarily, you don't have to force them to marry you, so you don't have to be alone, but say, hey, you know what, I invite you to my caregiving community because you understand. And I would, and flip the script and say, hey, if you ever want to talk about caregiving, I'm here. to be your support network too. So I would say, kind of like trying to figure out what to do with my life. Once I figured it out midway through, I said, well, if I embrace this, this is what I do. I talk about it actively, and I'm searching for people who are displaying similar behaviors like me, then those are the quality of people that I would want in my life. So I kind of stopped focus on the have-nots and then started on the creations of, if I can't have that, how can I shift it and what we can have here? And I'll segue a little bit into how I, after just from caregiving, I decided to think about the caregiving role. How, like you were saying, like, you know, how do we get people to become caregiving and start talking about who's going to be next in line to take care of whoever's aging? And I found that there's power in celebration. And for me, when I spoke earlier in my intro, I said, hey, you know, I finished caregiving, but I haven't stopped caregiving because I want to continue caregiving for caregivers that are out there and the community that is out there. And I find that in combining of answering the question, who's going to be caregiving for the aging folks in our family, and also in caregiver self-identification, I said, there's got to be a way to just kind of bring it all in a positive way, not just, oh, all of a sudden I'm a caregiver overnight. And then what I did was I said, you know what, I'm going to change it. I'm going to flip the script. I think we should celebrate the milestone of becoming a caregiver, celebrate the journey of entering caregiverhood. And just to talk a little bit about what I started, about my startup, my senior shower project, is to celebrate the milestone of a family member entering caregiverhood. Much like a baby shower at the beginning of life, there's a celebration for parenthood, for motherhood. I think, you know, as caregivers, for us, why don't we also celebrate the entrance into caregiverhood? This would be the naming of, you are about to be a caregiver for a senior in your family. Let's bring people together, share caregiving stories, bring you gifts, and then you can have that community community support at the very beginning of your journey, so that, as you've said, you have that safety net. Maybe you don't have time to date, but you know that there's people out there knowing that you've been caregiving. And I think that is my little push to say, hey, you know what? Let's celebrate the caregiver role in a very positive way, include family and friends, to kind of move the needle, and also really plug in intergenerational education. Because I believe when family members from just different generations attend such an event, just like birthdays, again, I'm going to go back to the baby shower, they can see people taking care of other people. Like, what is this celebration for? You can explain to the younger generation that I'm in this role, and one day you're going to be in this role too, to take care of somebody that needs that also needs help. Maybe they just need several. They're more dependent than when they were when we're more dependent now, and we as a family can do that and can identify with the family of, okay, somebody's going to take care of an older adult now, auntie blah 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 or uncle whoever. But you know, if the younger generation can see this role does exist within a family unit, they can have it in the back in their radar if they choose to take on that position. So. Yeah. And just kind of wrapping up, how do we have the conversation? How do we bring in self-identification? How do we build support? I think there's really unique ways that we can do that. And as caregivers and all of us, we can be creative in bringing up the conversation, normalizing the conversation, and also creating community, whether it's at a conference or on social media. There's so many ways. And that's why I'm so excited just to continue to be a caregiver. And also just saying, I'm 40. I'm proud to say I'm 40, where I'm still going. There's still so much more.
Most definitely. And it actually just dawned on me, I won't be 37 until next week. But I'm excited. I'm excited about aging, right? I'm excited about aging. And I look forward to every year that I get to celebrate another year of life, another year of caregiving. And I agree, Jen, I think it's about reframing and rebranding the way that we look at care, the way that we view and do care every day. And so it includes policy change. It includes culture change. And so, I look forward likewise to continuing to have these conversations and continuing to normalize a very normal part of life. And, it's about setting up that expectation. It's about creating community. And I think that we are both doing that. And I'm proud to be a part of these communities with you. It's definitely an honor. But I know that we have a host of questions. I believe our host, Calvin, has got a few for us, and looking forward to hearing what all of you, what's on your minds.
Thanks both for sharing your stories and sharing your time with us this afternoon. We definitely have lots and lots of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but one that I've seen come up a couple times, and you both bring great perspectives on this, is caregiving and work. So I know, Aisha, you're obviously working. You have lots and lots of things going on while still being a full-time caregiver. And Jen, at one point, you mentioned that you had left your job to take on that role full-time. So I guess what might be some considerations or recommendations you both might have with your kind of from both sides in terms of caregiving and work, what advice you might give for people in terms of staying in jobs, quitting jobs, thinking about work, paid employment versus kind of informal caregiving.
Yeah, Jen, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thank you for all these questions. I hope we can get to as many as possible today. I quit my job. I'm going to be honest. I did not plan for it. It was a heart trigger. I just did it. And I was working with my auntie. She enrolled me into in-home support services so that I can get paid as a caregiver for my grandma while being at home. It's not a huge paycheck compared to my career job, but it was a little something. So I would advocate, if you're looking into seeing if you can enroll yourself as a provider for your family member with your county, see if there's programs that are available to you. And also one thing that worked for me when I tried to start getting additional jobs was to talk to potential employers to let them know that caregiving is something that I do. Is there to negotiate in the interview if they provide flexible work schedules? That was something that was priority for me when I was interviewing for part-time jobs, letting them know caregiving is something that I do. So I say always bring up caregiving, because I believe that you should work for a company that has a culture that supports caregiving. And then in these times, I would say maybe not 10, 15 years ago when I was caring, but now talk about paid time leave for caregiving. I know it's not for all the states right now. There are states that can support job security if you were to take time off to take care of a family member. Ask, for these jobs and employers, ask about their policies. I think it's important. If you want to spend all that time, you have caregiving and then you have work. So I would advocate for you to work for a company or an organization that supports caregiving, and that's rolled into their employee benefits packages.
I agree. I would second everything you said, Jen. Certainly talk to your prospective employer about their paid family leave availability with benefits. And I would also say, take a look at the responsibilities that you have as a caregiver and add those to your resume. That's what I did. I think my current employer, Caring Across Generations, is certainly unique in that they have a deep understanding of what it means to be a caregiver and to have a career at the same time. So there's definitely flexibility and understanding around that. But I agree. I think that there are a lot of conversations being had in a lot of organizations and corporations about being more flexible and better supporting family caregivers and parents. And we've certainly seen that develop over the last year and a half during the pandemic. It's really affected a lot of families and a lot of organizations. So I think people are more willing to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Thank you.
great question.
We've got another question that was asked also a number of times, which is what, if any, resources did you find most helpful? I know you both mentioned, I heard Twitter, I heard Facebook, I heard some in-person support groups that were maybe not quite the best fit just due to the demographics of the other participants. But did either of you were either of you able to find some resources that were able to help you, or that you currently might recommend to caregivers, young caregivers?
I know I said I didn't connect with the demographic of the support groups I attended back in the day, but you know what? I still went. So the resources, I mean, finding community that actually other caregivers, it does help. They can soundboard. And the value of support groups is meeting other caregivers at different places on their caregiver journey. So you may see somebody that is doing, you may see yourself in somebody's position 3 years from now, and you can hear what they're dealing with, how they're handling it. And also, to me, the power of support groups to be able to release and to share, they were so powerful to me that after grandma died, I continued going to support groups, not for caregiving, but for just grieving, just to be in a space of people. But it's, finding the support group for you is kind of like dating. You got to find the right dynamic. And if you find the right one and the timing works out, I would say to do that, because we can't do it alone. We, as caregivers, just having the ability to emotionally connect and to express ourselves and to ask for resources within the group. Family caregivers are very resourceful. They have a lot of advice to give. And if you're in a local community, they have probably vetted certain resources and say, you should go to this, you should not do that, don't talk to this person. And it's real and raw and authentic. And that's information you won't find on the internet in a directory. People can give you real advice once you start building the relationships.
I agree. I think certainly, at Love Labor Project, we offer virtual support groups every other Saturday. So our next one is not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. So that's certainly an option for young adults. But I agree, it's about finding spaces that you feel comfortable. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll share everything in common with every individual in your space, whether it's virtual or in person. But finding a place where you feel comfortable sharing your story, and also where you connect with people and they feel comfortable sharing with you as well. I would also say finding opportunities for feeling empowered and being able to activate that power is something that helped me. That's how I actually got involved with Caring Cross. I started out as a volunteer. And so for me, there's so many things about caregiving. There are great things about caregiving. I've really been able to connect with my parents, but also there are things over which I have no control and no power. But being able to recognize that I do have power as a voter, as someone who can make a difference in terms of policy, has been really, really life-changing for me. And so it may even just be about thinking outside of the box. And so engaging in that way and activating politically, for me, has created an outlet and a release, and has given me purpose that I didn't necessarily have before, or that I didn't recognize that I had before. And so it may just mean, finding ways that you had not previously considered before. And community may also come in non-traditional forms. It may not look like a traditional, hi, my name's Aisha, support group, but it may be in the form of volunteerism and other types of activities, many of which you can participate in virtually.
I'm going to just piggyback off of that. I think the volunteering thing has created so many doors just in participating in committees that create caregiver conferences, or volunteers who really get out there and lobby for specific campaigns. Aisha and I were affiliated through Caring Across Generations to really support policies that do affect caregiving for the paid time leave. Like think about what you can do today and connect with people who are passionate. They're activists because they understand on affecting policy level what can trickle down, knowing that your voice can be amplified. It's huge. I think as a caregiver, maybe sometimes we feel like we're very isolated and alone. We're in our own world. But once you tap into other communities, it's so huge that it's hard not to be part of the momentum. Because there's people who care. There's more than 53 million caregivers. If not, there's going to be more. Given the COVID pandemic, more people are becoming caregivers. They didn't even know they were going to be a caregiver. So I would say tap into all the resources that make sense to you, that you can be passionate about, that resonate with you, and find out what role you can play. Because it's not just family caregiver. There's so much more.
I agree. And then I'll also just say with that, what I've also found is that in being more vocal about the fact that, yes, I am a caregiver, it's allowed me to connect with people who maybe would not have self-identified or publicly identified as caregivers. And these are folks maybe that I've met in a group who's interested in some other type of activity. And so we should already share that in common. And it becomes a pleasant surprise that, oh, wow, wait a minute, we are also both caregivers. So I think keeping an eye out for opportunities to connect with people in all different facets of your life, and then leaving that door open to talk about caregiving has also made a difference.
And I will add one more. I know I keep adding on. I mean, I really love our conversation right here. And the possibilities of caregivers, I mean, if you want to carve out what type of job, non-traditional caregiving, just blazing your own path as an entrepreneur. I want to say that because it's very possible these days with all the digital technology, the accelerator programs that are possible, incubator programs that are possible, and also just the ability to become influencers online, social media, on the social media platforms. You know your story, so write your story, be an author. So there's other ways where it's not necessarily what kind of job, like what kind of company will hire me as a caregiver while I balance a full-time job, but find one that works, that's the culture that matches for you. But also, I encourage you, explore your passion, see if you can start a project. Both Aisha and I started a project, just blazing that path, and you'll find that other caregivers are so encouraging that if you don't know, they will guide you. Trust me, they will guide you into the right direction. So those are other possibilities too in terms of career.
Thanks. We have another question about balance, about finding balance as a caregiver. Do either of you have any kind of recommendations or tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't mind, I can pop in here, Jen, because this is something that I've given a lot of consideration to. What I've also recognized, particularly starting as a young caregiver, is that because my path looks a little different, first of all, that does not decrease my value as a human being. Jen, earlier you mentioned FOMO, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, fear of missing out. And caregivers, regardless of age, can definitely experience that. What I had to come to terms with was that this is what I've chosen to do. I've chosen to be a caregiver to my parents. And so what that means is that doesn't mean that I can't pursue my dreams. It doesn't mean that I can't achieve things I want to achieve in life. It's just, as Jen, you mentioned, the pathway there may zigzag instead of going in a straight linear line. Or it just may mean that it happens a little further down the timeline than it has for other people. But once I stopped that comparison, and once I really kind of sat in the place that I was, accepted it, and prioritized my family, as well as prioritizing my own health and my own mental health, and I stopped stretching myself unnecessarily to, appease public, I won't say public perception, but popular perception, whether it was from family members or acquaintances on the outside looking in saying, well, you should be doing X, Y, or Z by now, or you should have achieved A, B, and C. Once I divorced myself from that way of thinking and the pressure associated with that, I was finally able to welcome then things that brought me joy, things that brought me peace. Am I going to the spa? No, that's okay. What I do enjoy is a bubble bath on occasion. It may not be a ritualistic thing that happens every night, but I enjoy it when I take the bath. I get in the bath, I've got the podcast on, and that's my moment. It may be, as Jen described, eating some ice cream.
Yeah.
It's about putting emphasis on those things that bring you joy and less emphasis on the things that don't provide joy. That being said, it can be really challenging. And so I think, it's about examining what you have on your plate and figuring out what you can eliminate, right? That's where I've found balance. And it's a process, and it's something you have to work on, or at least in my case, I have to work on, and I will continue to work on, because it's not automatic, and it very much is the opposite of what culture tells you that you should do. Particularly as women, I feel like we are, and we've seen as, our Olympic athletes have so boldly discussed lately, this idea that you should just kind of muscle through with imbalance. But I'm really embracing the idea of not doing that any longer, and really what's doing best for my family and what's best for myself, even if that means, taking a step back from a few things.
I hear you, Aisha. Everything you're saying screams self-care. One more time, self-care, caregivers. In order to keep caregiving, you got to take care of yourself. And I really think about self-care in several components. Taking care of yourself, so that you can do what you love doing and continue to do it for as long as you can. I think of it as there's the emotional aspect, there's the mental aspect, the mental health, physical health, and I also like to throw in the spiritual health. Whatever it is for you, whatever combination it is, to find that balance is to figure out what you're prioritizing for, if that not for that day or for that moment, and to find the balance of how you can set goals to check in with those different components throughout the day, throughout the week, or throughout the month. Mark times for when you are taking care of yourself, because I really think it all really comes within. You got to, to me, loving oneself is offering even a fuller version of yourself to be a caregiver. So I'm a huge fan in terms of just answering how do I balance things. I'm a huge fan of a habit tracking journal, so that you can visually see, what habits have you set for yourself for this week or this month, and see if you did it, and see how you felt, and check in and say, that felt good. Maybe once spa once a week is not enough. That felt really good, and I want more. Let's make it twice a month. And you can look back on that journal and see all the things that you accomplished for yourself. A lot of times we can talk to ourselves and say, I don't have time for myself. But once you chart it, do things for you, because you're so good at doing things for other people. You have permission to do things for yourself too. So I just say self-care. Self-care is so important on all those levels.
Definitely. And I would just really quickly add to that, setting boundaries. I think,
yes.
whether it's physical boundaries, meaning you have one little space that you dedicate to yourself where there's something there that's symbolic, that brings you joy, or setting relationship boundaries around the people who have say in the care plan for the person you're caring for. There are a lot of ways to set boundaries that can make a world of difference. And I've found that really important as well.
Yeah. Boundaries. I do want to hop in. I know we're probably approaching the time, but I think boundaries also is expressing capacity, the emotional capacity to have a conversation, to receive new information, and to give more by setting, hey, I don't have the capacity right now. What you're saying is really important to me. Let me get back to you. And that takes practice. All of this juggling, everybody that's tuning in, it all takes practice, and it kind of ebbs and flows as the caregiver journey happens. And so each day is a new day to make new choices and to figure out how we can become the caregiver that we choose to be. How are we doing, Calvin?
Unfortunately, yeah, we're out of time. I hate to end it, but yeah, it looks like we're right at the hour. So thank you both for sharing your time, your expertise, your stories, your insights, your advice with everybody. It was really great to have you both on and to have that conversation between the two of you. So thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. Um,
Thank you.
and everyone, of course, thanks for spending your time with us, and Jen and Aisha with us. So we appreciate you tuning in. I am going to get a quick little survey up and share our information. But again, I think that's all the time we have for this one. So we do appreciate you participating. I'll leave a quick poll up to provide if you might be able to provide feedback. I'd certainly appreciate that. But I understand we're a little bit over time. But again, thank you so much, everybody, for participating in this webinar. And thank you, Aisha and Jen, for spending your time with us again.
Thank you, Calvin.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So thanks, everyone. I think this is all the time we have for this webinar. I'll leave our information up for a little bit. I'll leave the evaluation up if you have a moment to fill that out. But again, I think that will wrap this one up. Thanks so much again, and thanks to our two presenters.